How's it going, everyone? In this video, I'm going to go over 4 steps to setting better boundaries. This is critically important if you want to be able to, have boundaries and safe space from other people and not let them run your life and make sure that you're in control. So, like I mentioned in this video, I'm going to be talking about setting boundaries, 4 steps to kind of do it for different pieces or approaches or parts of it. And the reason that boundaries are so important is if we don't set them, others may intentionally or unintentionally overstep these boundaries, and we may end up in a place where we are paying too high of a price to try to please others. So we need to learn how to really set those boundaries so that we can shape our relationships in a way that is beneficial for all parties involved instead of just sort of letting everyone else do whatever they want, right? And even if it's not malicious, it can come through in ways that other people are treating you in a way or having you do things, or you are just doing things that aren't really what you want to be doing. So let's go through a couple of steps on how to work on this. The first step, and maybe the most simple way out or the easiest thing to do, but maybe not the best in the long term, is to distance yourself, right? When you notice other people stepping over your boundaries, especially when it's malicious, one of the first things that you can do is distance yourself, right? Stop spending time with the people who are making you feel that way or taking advantage of you, or however this sort of boundary breaking is happening. The very first thing that you can do is to get more space, right? And by creating this space, you unlock a number of other things, right? You give yourself more time to process, more time to come up with ideas. But if you don't have any other tools, the first step here is to make sure you have enough distance from these relationships so that you can start thinking about these other things, and most importantly, not be having your boundaries kind of pushed around and broken in ways that don't feel good to you. Now, the second step is to actually communicate your boundaries, right? A lot of times what happens in the non-malicious mode is to basically have individuals around us acting in ways that actually cross our boundaries and we don't like it, but we don't actually end up telling them what it is that we don't like or how we would like them to act. And then, in the malicious case, like maybe these people know what's going on, but you haven't shown an ability to stand up for yourself, and so they're going to continue using you in the ways that they can, or continuing to act this way because it's benefiting them in some way, even if it's not great for you. So the way to really communicate this is ideally you're going to want to find a situation that is not escalated, right? A lot of times these boundary pushing situations can be escalated, and it can be harder to kind of talk in the way that you want and formulate the right ideas and communicate the types of actions and how they're impacting you. So you're going to want to find a time that's separate from that, right? And say, hey, I just wanted to talk to you. I noticed that, when we're in front of people, you make fun of me a lot. I don't really like that. It's hurtful in a way that it just doesn't seem fun, even though you might think it's joking, something like that, where you are making it clear what the behaviors are and how they're impacting you outside of these escalated situations that can happen. The other piece of that is to make sure that you are communicating in a way that you focus on the action, not the person, right? So you are telling them what action is impacting you instead of saying, hey, you're just a jerk, and attacking their character in various ways, because that's going to put people on the defensive. Now, if you're able to approach this in kind of a gentle way and bring it up, and they're not very receptive to it, that's kind of a red flag, because obviously you want to be able to have boundaries. So keep an eye on that. But for the most part, most people are going to be receptive to that and think about like, oh, okay, how can I act that will better serve this relationship? Now, this can be a really difficult thing, right? It's not easy to tell people the way that they're acting isn't making you feel good. So this is probably going to be one of the steps that takes the most push or most effort, but it's also the most likely to pay off, because a lot of times people are doing these things without even knowing what your boundaries are or how they're impacting you. The third step is to stop justifying your actions. So this has a little bit of nuance built in, but basically a lot of people who have a problem with setting boundaries also have an idea that when they try to set these boundaries, they just go on with this long exposition, and it's coming from a place of basically saying, hey, I don't know if this boundary is right or makes sense, but here's the reason I'm doing it, and I can't make it because I have this going on, I have this other thing happening, and I'm doing this, and I don't, it comes from a place that is very other first, right? It is justified. You try to justify it in the hopes that they will not keep asking or pushing or whatever else, because that guilt is going to start dragging you back towards that behavior that you don't want to do, or away from that boundary. So The key here is really centering in when you set those boundaries, on doing it from sort of a place of, hey, I don't like this, I don't want this to happen anymore, as opposed to, hey, is it okay if we sort of set up our relationship this way? I would, right? When you're able to ground down into a more authentic place where you're coming internal to external instead of external to internal, then you have more of an ability to stick with it. The other thing is, this justification stuff can feel really bad if you're trying to justify it, right? The core is not how the person is going to respond, which may or may not be positive, and that can have some influence, but the core is that you don't feel like you have the respect or enough power to set this sort of boundary, so you're kind of hoping that they go along with it. So to work on this, you really need to figure out what the boundary is and why it's important to you so that you're able to speak about it confidently. Now, sometimes this comes in the form of not having to provide a really lengthy explanation, or being able to say the explanation in a short way that is going to work for you, right? Because sometimes this comes across in a way that's like, don't explain yourself and don't tell anyone why you're doing what you're doing, and that can potentially be negative for some of the relationships that you find valuable, right? If your mom wants you to come to church every week and you don't want to do that, and you just say, I'm not going to church, and you've never said that before, and she asks why, and you just say, like, I'm not going to tell you why, I don't have to tell you why, then you end up in this weird place where, yes, you're not justifying yourself, but you're also not communicating in the relationship in the way that's typically normal. So it's less about not explaining, right? And it's more about how you ground down. Because if you're saying, like, I really hope that I could not go this week because I don't want to, and the reason is because I started thinking about it, and like, if it's a very weak place that you do come out of from a basis, then, and you're waiting for their approval, that's a different thing. That's what we want to avoid. Another piece of this to remember is that, it's not mean or rude or anything to have certain preferences. Other people may want you to have specific preferences, but that's not your responsibility to hold the preferences that they want you to have, right? It's your responsibility to communicate the preferences that you do have, and not bow to everyone else's whims and wishes. The fourth step here is to enforce your boundaries. Now, this is going to be the hardest one, right? Communicating it can be pretty hard, but enforcing it is extremely difficult. So as you set these boundaries and start working through them, you have to pay attention to whether the other person is actually making an effort to maintain those boundaries, right? If they are not helping you to accomplish these goals, you need to look at, some of these other strategies like distancing. Because it's a two-way interaction, right? You can assert your boundaries really strongly, and if someone doesn't respect them and continues not to respect them and is not making any efforts, then you have to find some other way to shape or form that relationship because it's not working out. That being said, there is some nuance here, right? If people are doing their best and they forget, or they are making an effort and they're making some progress but they slip up, the relationships are valuable, so you have to kind of weigh out what it is that they're doing, how it's impacting you, how much effort they're putting in, how well they're following up, and whatnot, right? Like things like, if someone is physically abusive or something, and then you try to set that boundary and it doesn't work, that's not going to work. That's too intense of a situation. But there are other things like, maybe people are a little bit sarcastic and you don't like that, and you've asked for that boundary and they do it a little bit less, but they still do it and they're kind of working on it, and that they're making an effort, then that all makes a difference. So there's a lot of nuance here, but the important part is that you find a way to actually enforce your boundaries and know of other options or things that you can do or ways that you can kind of assert your boundaries right after that initial conversation to make sure that the relationship is moving in the direction that you're looking for. So hopefully those 4 steps can help you start thinking about what it takes to set up some boundaries and enforce them so that you can have the types of relationship that you want. Of course, this is not an easy process. There are going to be times where it doesn't go well. There's going to be internal struggle. There's going to be emotions that come up. There's going to be habits that need to be broken and reformed. And some relationships are probably going to change. Others may not make it through this process. But at the same time, if people are not respecting your boundaries and are not treating you well, then it's not going to be a valuable relationship, right? You need to find a way to form your relationships that is going to be mutually beneficial and pleasant and just doesn't feel like this terrible burden all the time. So let's move on to a couple exercises. 1, take a break and reflect on your relationships. Create a list of things that made you uncomfortable. Now create a list of boundaries you need to set. 2, who do you need to communicate your boundaries to? Pick a time to have a conversation with them. 3, think of a time that you chose to say no to someone. Did it come from a place internally or externally? Did you feel the need to justify it, or did you feel comfortable giving your explanation? 4, pick a time to journal. Focus on how your social interactions went. Were there times when you felt uncomfortable? What boundaries could you have set? All right, so that's all I've got for this video. Hopefully it gives you a couple ideas on where to start. If you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, throw them down in the box below. I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.